Okay, we're back from taking the exam, and actually the answer or the descriptor key is in the handout packet that's part of your program. It's and we're going to talk more about this handout packet later, but this will be the first thing in here. It's called Scoring the Conflict Resolution Questionnaire. Well, once again, when you take this test, I want to make sure that you put yourself in the frame of mind to take it in the environment that you think that you need the most help or the most explanation to yourself about how you deal and handle conflict, whether that's in your home environment or whether it's in your work environment or as your role as a parent, a teacher, an educator, a son, or a daughter, or a mother. So in scoring this questionnaire, on these questions, and these questions only, questions 1, 3, 13, 18, 22, 24, 26, 27, 31, 32, 33, and 35, you're going to reverse those scores and carry them over to the right-hand column. You're going to reverse those scores and carry them over to the right-hand column. So for example, if on question number 1, on the left-hand column you had scored it a 5, you will now convert that to a 1 and carry it over to the right-hand column. A 4 will become a 2, a 3 will stay a 3, a 2 will become a 4, and a 1 will become a 5. And then you'll add up all 4 questions to come up with an overall total for that particular letter. And one of the advantages of this scoring questionnaire is it gives you an explanation for the intent or the meaning for each individual question. So at a later time, you can actually sit down and analyze why you think that you answered a question the way you did, and the things that you might need to do, either training or counseling or more education or more study in order to improve or change your philosophy regarding a certain issue. Okay? The first section is view. The first section is V for view, which means that you view conflict as natural and positive. Now, let me also start off by saying that the maximum points you can have for any section is how many? 20, right, 5. And so the higher you score on these sections, the more inclined you are to handle conflict the way that you've described it here. And so the higher your score, just like the way that I play golf, the better you are, right? Have I always gotten that wrong? Okay. Okay, so high score doesn't mean that you're good. Okay. A high score in this is a good thing. It means that you are either adept at handling conflict or deal with conflict or view conflict in this manner. So the first section is V, view conflict as natural and positive. This means that you have the ability to view and understand conflict as a natural outgrowth of diversity among people, which can be addressed in a win-win that strengthens relationships. You have the ability to view that the resolution of a conflict and the building of relationships as interrelated. You also believe that prevention works best. You know, that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, it's never so much more true than in dealing with conflict, that you believe that prevention works best, okay? You believe that and have the ability to separate the people from the problem. So many times we focus on the individual. Well, that's just a sorry person. Well, no, the things that person does may not be acceptable to us, but that's not the person. The things that person does. You know, sometimes we say that we want to do something to someone. You know, we want to get even with them. We want to punish them. We want to punish the person. No, what we want to do is we want to correct the action. Okay, and if correcting the action then changes the attitude or the actions of the person, then that's fine. But many times we don't think about what the problem is, we think about the person. And so if you scored high in this area, you have the ability to separate the problem from the person. So how many folks scored 15 or higher on this section? Oh, very, very good. How about 10 or higher? Okay, most everybody. Now, Also, if you score, the lowest you can score on any of these would be 4 points, okay? And fortunately, we have an armed officer present, so just in case any of you score too low, then, you know, the rest of us will be protected. And Byron, I'm not going to ask you what you score on these questions since you do carry a weapon. Okay, atmosphere. Oh, and by the way, on the scoring, if you score 15 or higher, that's considered exceptional, that you are very adept at whatever this particular environment or philosophy is. If you score 10 or higher, that's good. That's, as a matter of fact, it's outstanding. If you score lower than that, then you probably ought to look at the individual questions that you scored 3, 2, or 1 on to determine why you may have answered it that way. Because it may be simply that you're thinking about one particular incident that caused you to score it that way. But that's not your overall attitude about how to deal with a question or a problem. The second one is atmosphere. Atmosphere means that you believe in starting or establishing an effective atmosphere that promotes partnership and problem solving. Well, that is what we do in the mediation process, is we create an environment that's conducive to allowing people to feel safe and secure and be able to talk about what their issues are without fear of reprisal or retribution. You believe that you should help the other feel comfortable and safe, affirming the importance of the relationship. Once again, establishing the atmosphere is one of the primary benefits of why the mediation process is successful. The next section is letter C. Letter C stands for clarifying perceptions. You have the ability to work with the other so that both are very clear about what the conflict is really about. You have the ability to eliminate ghost issues. Well, so many times when we do mediations, when we come to a mediation, we think that it's Smith versus Jones, and what we know about this case is that it's a contract dispute, or it's a labor dispute, or it's an employment dispute. But what's the real issue here? What's the true issue here? There's a case I did one time. I set up the pilot program for the conflict resolution system for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, for HUD. Back in 1996, all of the federal agencies were required to establish some type of conflict resolution program. And they were highly recommended that they use some outside source. Well, since I was already a mediator and had done a lot of mediations up to that point, I was given the opportunity to participate in the pilot program to develop a conflict resolution program. Some of the guidelines that we established were that you couldn't mediate for people in your own department. You couldn't mediate for people in your own section, which makes sense because you would naturally be biased or have preconceived ideas about the folks you worked with or that you worked against or whatever the situation was. But anyway, we came across this first situation that we had. Now, also you have to understand that the government is also a labor management situation where you have unions involved. And one of the most difficult things was to convince management and the union that neither one of them were going to lose their legal powers of filing grievances, filing unfair labor practices, and so forth. And management was afraid that this would give up their power to take corrective action that was needed or mandated. And so the program that we set up, that I helped create, was a program that as soon as a conflict took place, or as soon as it reached the level that it needed to be, that it became an issue of either filing an EEO complaint or taking some type of corrective action, then they would request mediation. And they had 2 weeks, we had 2 weeks to schedule the mediation and to complete it. And we would actually, management and labor agreed to freeze the time clocks on filing an EEO complaint or taking management corrective action. So we had this 2-week window. Well, the very first case that came about was, as it would happen to be, I worked in the Fair Housing Enforcement Division. And it turned out that it was there was a hostile work environment complaint called against my director. Now, my director was within 2 months of retiring. He'd been with the department over 35 years. He had had a spotless record, except now, because of this suit that was filed, this complaint that was filed, he was actually in jeopardy of losing his retirement after having a spotless record for 35 years. And what this whole complaint was about was you had 3 women. I know it's hard to believe that women would have such a conflict that would rise to that level. But these 3 women had filed a hostile work environment complaint against their director because the director had allowed this conflict to exist between these 3 women. Matter of fact, he didn't even know about it until the complaint was filed. And what had happened is that these women, it was 2 against 1, and it started off actually 3 years earlier, as we found out. And they would do little things to each other, like, take a bottle of syrup and pour it in one of them's desk and fill it full of the hole punches that you would collect over a period of time. One of them put a dead rat in another one's purse. And those were the nicer things they did. There's some of the things I can't repeat here live. Stuff that guys would never even think about doing in a million years. But anyway, this escalated over this 3-year period of time. It got nastier and worse and worse and worse. Now, for the most part, they were able to keep it amongst the 3 of them. And where this conflict really started was, well, first of all, it was 3 administrative assistants. And what had happened was when we got into the mediation session and we went through the opening statements, and we said, well, first of all, we violated the first rule, was I'm not supposed to mediate with folks that you know, but the assistant secretary said, this is your program. If you can't make it work with your own people, then you're not going to be able to work anywhere. So I had no choice. So I'm mediating this, and I know everybody involved. And so we started out, and I just simply said, where did all this start? Because these women had been best of friends at one point years ago. And so I just simply asked the question, where did all this start? And one of the ladies said, well, 3 years ago, we went to this training in Washington, D.C., and at the lunch break, we all went to this big mall in one of the cities close by, and they got separated somehow. And as 2 of them were walking along the ground level, the other lady was coming down an escalator, and she saw the other 2, and she hollered at them, and she thought that she saw them look at her and then just ignore her and walk on. Well, it was during the holiday season. It was very crowded, and these other women said, we didn't know what this was all about. We never saw you up there, because see, she never told them why she was mad at them, ever. And so she took the first action. She was the one that did the first thing with the syrup or the glue or whatever it was that they were messing with. And then the others just retaliated, and they never sat down to talk about what the real problem was, where the real issue started out. And so, they're sitting there looking at each other, and they're thinking, well, no, we didn't see you. And she says, y'all didn't see me? And I says, no, it was crowded. There was lots of noise. There was Christmas music going on, and the place was crowded. We were just looking around. We didn't see you. Matter of fact, we were specifically looking for you. And then when we came back from lunch break, you wouldn't talk to us. So we thought we had done something wrong. And for 3 years, they had let this thing perpetuate. And so, they jumped up and started hugging and kissing. I tried to get in the middle, but it was too late. This was a ghost issue. This was the real reason that they had filed this hostile work environment complaint. Had nothing whatsoever to do with the work environment. It had to do with something that had happened 3 years earlier that had just escalated. I mean, everybody was so happy. They withdrew their complaint. Now they were best of friends again. The big crime here is that the only stuff they really damaged was each other's personal stuff, and of course the wasted time to clean up the mess that they made. But the director was happy, and anyway, the program is still ongoing at the department now. And it was just I don't know if it was luck or destiny or it was meant to be, but we were able to resolve that first complaint. And so you had some very impressed folks. But only because I asked one simple question, you know, where did this start? Where did this start? And so by asking that one, I'm a brilliant mediator because I asked one question. And that was all I did. I didn't ask any other questions. I didn't do anything. Okay? Anyway, many times when you come to these mediations, you're going to have ghost issues or hidden agendas. Okay? And so you need to be able to recognize those. You have the ability to use I statements. And the I statements, they make people know how you feel as opposed to you statements, which you statements typically say and put blame on people. For example, let's say that you had a 17-year-old teenage son who had a tendency to not come in on curfew. This is a fictitious story. Right. And so what happens is, if mom's standing there at the door and saying, where have you been and who have you been with, and don't they have phones where you were at, and and rattling off about 30 questions, and of course the poor kid's standing there thinking, okay, which question do I answer? And no matter how I answer, I'm wrong. Okay, because she's mad and upset because, you know, and she's focusing in on you instead of her saying, you know, I'm disappointed when you break curfew. It makes me feel bad when you don't do things the way you're supposed to. And so by turning it around and showing how it affects her as opposed to the negative things that he has done, then you have a better chance of resolving the issue and a better chance of not repeating that same act. So how many folks scored 20 or 15 or higher on this? Good. 10 or higher? Okay, good. N stands for note the needs, not the wants. You have the ability to separate, remember we talked about yesterday, that being able to identify a need versus a want. You have the ability to identify the needs that are essential to you and your partner and your relationship. You also have the ability to distinguish between the real needs and secondary desires. How many scored 15 or higher on this? Good, good. Because this is one of the key traits for a mediator. P stands for produce positive partnership power, which means that you have the ability to avoid negative power over, which wastes energy in a seesaw battle. Okay? F stands for focus on the future first, then learn from the past. This is a key element of being a good mediator, is to being able to take any situation and direct it towards dealing with the future, focusing on the future. Because that's what it's going to take to resolve these issues, is to focus on the future relationship. Not to dwell on the past, but to deal with how can we make this relationship work in the future.